The kettle whistled softly, filling the quiet kitchen with a familiar hiss. Renata Richter reached for the teacup her husband once used, chipped at the rim, gold fading along the edge, and poured water into it like she had done every morning for decades. The clock on the wall ticked past 10. Her heart gave a small, hopeful flutter. He must be awake by now, she thought. I'll call him before he leaves for work. The phone sat on the counter beside a neatly folded napkin. Renata had placed it there the night before, reminding herself to call Max. She'd even written a note, ask about the wedding date, smiling face with smiling eyes, with a small heart beside his name. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed. For years, every conversation with her son began with warmth, with the sense that he still needed her. But lately, calls had been shorter, colder. He always sounded distracted, as if love had become a duty. The line rang twice. Then a voice, not his, answered. Hello. It was Lena. Polite. Sharp. Ah, hello, dear. It's me, Renata. She forced cheer into her voice. I just wanted to ask when the wedding will be. I need to find a proper dress, and I thought maybe. Lena's reply cut through her sentence like the snap of glass. Oh, we got married yesterday. Renata blinked. I beg your pardon? There was a pause, deliberate and cruel. Yes, yesterday. It was small. Only special people were invited. The words echoed in Renata's ear, hollow and cold. Only special people. She could hear laughter faintly in the background, Lena's voice mingling with Max's, and the clinking of dishes, as if breakfast were being served in a home that used to depend on her generosity. I see, Renata managed, gripping the counter to steady herself. That's wonderful news. Lena made a light, almost mocking sound. We'll send pictures later. Bye, Renata. The call ended. The kitchen fell silent, except for the steady tick of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Renata stared at her reflection in the glass of the window, a face that suddenly looked older, unfamiliar. Her hand was still frozen on the counter, clutching the edge as though it might keep her standing. She sank into the chair by the table. For a long time, she didn't move. Special people. 3 years. She had paid their rent, bought their furniture, filled their fridge, covered doctor bills, car repairs, birthdays. Her pension stretched thin so they could have a chance at comfort. And now, after all that, she hadn't even been told her only son was married. Her throat tightened. A quiet, fragile sound escaped her lips. Not quite a sob, but close. On the shelf above the stove sat a framed photograph. Max at 12, holding a fishing rod beside his late father. Both smiling, both proud. The sight tore something inside her. She picked up the photo with trembling hands. Your father would have wanted to be there too, she whispered. We both would have. The kettle had cooled by now. The tea was untouched. Outside, children played somewhere in the distance, their laughter drifting through the open window. It felt like another world, one where mothers still mattered. Renata rose slowly, setting the picture back in place. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if order could hide the emptiness crawling beneath her skin. In the hallway, she passed a dress bag hanging on the door, pale lavender satin, chosen for the wedding that would never need her presence. She reached out, brushing the fabric with her fingertips. A whisper slipped from her lips before she could stop it. I raised a stranger. She turned off the kitchen light and walked toward the quiet of the living room, where sunlight pooled across the floorboards like spilled gold. Bright, beautiful, and indifferent. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would call again. Not to congratulate, not to plead, but to understand why. For now, though, the house stayed silent. The only sound was the clock, ticking forward, marking the exact moment a mother's heart began to change. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, bright but unwelcome. Renata sat at the kitchen table, the same untouched cup of tea from last night still sitting before her. Sleep hadn't come, only thoughts that refused to quiet. She reached for her phone, intending to check the weather, anything to distract herself. But as soon as the screen lit up, a notification blinked. Lena Muller posted new photos. Her thumb hesitated. A single tap opened the world she hadn't been invited into. There they were, her son and his new wife, radiant under an arch of white roses. Max looked happy, younger even, the kind of happiness that once belonged only to family celebrations. Beside him, Lena shone in the same ivory gown Renata had paid for months ago, claiming it was just a backup for a future event. The ring glinting on her hand, she recognized that too. It was her husband's old band, melted down and reshaped after his passing. Renata's heart constricted. Every picture told the same story. Laughter, glasses raised, Lena's parents dancing, her siblings throwing petals. Strangers smiling inside a moment Renata had helped build but never seen. Her name wasn't tagged. No mention, no thanks, not even a trace of acknowledgement. She scrolled slower now, her fingers trembling as she reached a video clip. Someone's voice said, "To family and new beginnings," and the guests cheered. In the background, she saw Max lift a glass, his face glowing with joy. For the first time, she saw what she had refused to believe. Her son was no longer hers. Renata set the phone down, her vision blurring. In the silence, memories began to surface. Soft, painful fragments. Max at 6, running barefoot through the garden with a toy airplane. Max at 16, standing by his father's hospital bed, pretending not to cry. The day of the funeral, his hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt. "Don't worry, Mom," he'd said, voice breaking. "I'll always take care of you." She had built her world around that promise. Every dollar she saved, every sacrifice, every gentle forgiveness had come from that memory of his small hand in hers. She'd mistaken obligation for love, gratitude for affection. And Lena, clever, polite, with a smile that never reached her eyes, had seen it from the beginning. Renata looked around her small house, noticing all the invisible threads that connected her to them. The bills on the counter, the monthly bank transfers she made like clockwork, the grocery lists she mailed when they claimed they were too busy. Every line of generosity had become a leash. Her chest tightened with something between rage and clarity. She stood up, walked to the desk by the window, and opened her laptop. The screen glowed pale blue as she logged into her online banking account. Her fingers hovered over the scheduled transfer to Max and Lena, $500, recurring monthly. A habit of love, disguised as duty. For the first time in years, her hand didn't shake. She clicked, "Cancel." The confirmation message blinked. "This transaction has been successfully removed." The quiet that followed felt heavier than sound, a silence dense enough to fill the entire house. Renata closed the laptop slowly and looked out the window. The sun was setting now, bleeding gold into the clouds, the same way her heart once bled warmth into a family that no longer wanted her. In that fading light, she made herself a promise. No more gifts. No more excuses. Tomorrow, she decided, she would face whatever came next, even if it meant facing them. The clock ticked once, marking the end of her hesitation and the beginning of something colder, sharper. The weeks that followed passed like a long gray season. The air in Renata's house had changed, quieter somehow, emptier. The phone no longer rang in the evenings, the way it used to when Max needed advice or money. The silence was sharp, but also strangely clean, like a wound finally drained. Every morning, she made tea, read the newspaper, and told herself she was fine. But by nightfall, loneliness crept back, the kind that hums in the walls, whispering that no one will ever knock again. Then, one Thursday afternoon, her phone finally rang. She froze when she saw the name. Lena. For a moment, Renata considered letting it ring. But curiosity, or perhaps habit, won. "Hello." The voice that answered was not cold this time. It was trembling. "Renata, please, it's bad. The landlord's giving us 2 days to pay the rent or we're out on the street." Renata closed her eyes. "Lena, I told you last time, I can't help anymore. You two are married now. You need to learn to stand on your own." "But we've tried." Lena's breath hitched, every word soaked in practiced panic. "Max's hours got cut, and my paycheck hasn't come. We'll have nowhere to go." Renata stayed silent. Her heart thudded painfully against her chest. 4 years, those pleas had been her weakness. She could already feel her fingers wanting to reach for her purse, but she didn't move. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I just can't." The line went still. Then a low exhale, almost a hiss. "I see," Lena said, her voice turning flat. "I guess we know where we stand." Click. The call ended. Renata sat there for a long time, staring at the silent phone. A strange chill moved through her. Not guilt, not fear, something heavier. She told herself it was relief. But relief didn't last. Within a week, her mail stopped arriving. First the electricity bill, then the pension notice. When she went to the post office, they told her there'd been a temporary forwarding request placed under her name. She hadn't signed any such thing. Then the electricity went out. The phone line crackled and died for 2 days. She paid the bills again, in person this time, but the clerk gave her a look, half pity, half suspicion, when she signed the form. Something was wrong. On the 3rd week, the real blow came. Mr. Klein from the bank called. His voice was polite but uneasy. "Mrs. Richter, just to confirm, are you aware of the new power of attorney document on your account?" Renata felt her pulse skip. "What document?" "It authorizes your son, Max Richter, to manage your finances in case of mental incapacity. We just received it for verification." For a moment, the world blurred around her. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, breath catching in her throat. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I never signed anything." Mr. Klein hesitated. "Then you should come in immediately. We'll put a hold on the account until we verify it." When the call ended, Renata stood motionless in the dim light of her kitchen. Her reflection stared back from the window, the same tired eyes, but now filled with something new, dread. The betrayal had shifted. It was no longer emotional. It was calculated. Someone wanted control, not of her heart this time, but of her life. Outside, the wind howled faintly through the trees, carrying with it the feeling that something had begun to move against her, something silent, deliberate, and close. Renata picked up her coat. Tomorrow, she would go to the bank. Whatever this was, she needed to see it with her own eyes. The next morning, Renata arrived at the bank 15 minutes before opening. She stood outside in the chill, watching the automatic doors reflect her uneasy face, a faint ghost in the glass. Her hands were trembling, though not from the cold. When the doors finally slid open, she stepped inside, clutching her handbag like armor. Mr. Klein, the bank manager, recognized her immediately. His usual warmth was replaced by careful professionalism. "Mrs. Richter," he said, guiding her into his office. "I'm glad you came so quickly." He closed the door behind them. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the light into thin, nervous lines across the desk. "There's been an unusual submission on your account," he began. "A power of attorney, accompanied by a medical certificate. It claims you've been declared mentally unfit to manage your own finances." Renata's breath caught. "That's absurd." Mr. Klein slid a folder across the desk. Inside lay 2 documents, one a typed statement from a psychiatrist she had never met, and another bearing her signature at the bottom. The handwriting was eerily familiar. Her stomach tightened. She traced a finger over the name. Renata Richter. It was her signature, or a near-perfect imitation. "I didn't sign this," she said, voice shaking. "Who gave you these?" "The documents were delivered by courier yesterday," Mr. Klein replied. "From a law office representing your son, a Mr. Fisher." Renata blinked. "I don't know any Mr. Fisher. He's listed as the family's legal counsel." Her pulse pounded in her ears. The world seemed to narrow, the edges of the office closing in. "Please freeze my account," she whispered. "Immediately." Mr. Klein nodded. "We already have. But I'd advise you to consult your own lawyer, and perhaps your doctor, to have an official evaluation on record. It might help if this escalates." If this escalates. The phrase lodged in her mind like a splinter. She left the bank feeling smaller than when she'd entered. The city around her, the crosswalks, the chatter, the passing cars, all felt unreal, as if she were walking through someone else's dream. Back home, the mailbox gaped open. Empty again. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves scraping across her doorstep. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the forged papers now lying in front of her. The signature mocked her. Graceful, perfect, false. For the first time, she spoke the thought she had tried to suppress. "It's Lena," she said softly. "It has to be." But another voice whispered inside her, and Max let her. She picked up her phone and called her son. It rang, and finally went to voicemail. She tried again. This time, he answered, tired, distant. "Mom, Lena told me you've been confused lately," he said, cutting her off before she could explain. "She said you've been losing things, forgetting appointments. Maybe you should let someone help manage your finances." "Max," she interrupted, heart racing. "It's not true. They forged my signature. You have to believe me." Silence. Then a sigh. "Mom, please. I don't want to argue. Mr. Fisher says everything's being handled legally." Click. The line went dead. Renata stared at the phone, the weight of disbelief pressing down on her chest. Her own son had chosen a stranger's voice over hers. That night, she opened a fresh notebook, a small, leather-bound one she'd once planned to use for recipes. On the first page, she wrote in careful, deliberate handwriting, "Evidence, for when they come for me." She listed every incident, the missing mail, the fake documents, the bank call, the silence from Max. Each word steadied her hand a little more. By midnight, the house had gone completely still. Outside, she heard muffled laughter, her neighbors, perhaps, whispering. She caught a few words through the thin walls. "Poor woman. Losing it. Shame at her age." Renata closed the notebook, her heart burning with a quiet fury. They could call her mad if they wanted. She knew the truth, and she would prove it. Tomorrow, she would find out who this Mr. Fisher really was. The next morning came gray and damp, the kind of morning that felt suspended in silence. Renata sat by the window, her notebook open beside a half-eaten slice of toast. Outside, rain traced crooked lines down the glass, turning the street into a blurred watercolor. She hadn't slept. The forged papers still sat on the kitchen counter, a quiet accusation against everything she had trusted. Somewhere, in an office she'd never seen, a stranger now claimed the right to decide her fate. A soft knock startled her. When she opened the door, Eleanor Brooks stood there, a woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pinned neatly and eyes that carried both kindness and sharpness. She lived next door, a retired librarian who rarely intruded. "Good morning, Renata," she said gently. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I've been worried." Renata forced a faint smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." Eleanor hesitated, glancing past her into the dim kitchen. "Would you mind if I came in for a moment?" Renata nodded, stepping aside. As the kettle began to hum, Eleanor folded her hands around her cup, watching Renata closely. "I probably shouldn't say this," she began, "but I saw something odd last week. The day you had your doctor's appointment, Tuesday morning, wasn't it?" Renata froze. "Yes. What about it?" "I saw your daughter-in-law. Lena, I think. She was coming out of your front gate, carrying a stack of folders. I assumed you'd asked her to pick something up for you." Renata's pulse quickened. "I didn't." Eleanor's expression darkened. "I thought not." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small envelope. "She dropped this outside. I picked it up and meant to return it, but I wasn't sure if it was private." Inside was a photocopy of Renata's ID, her signature, address, and pension details. At the bottom, a faint stamp from the same bank Mr. Klein had mentioned. Renata's hands trembled. "She had these." "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "And I think she took more than that." They spread the contents across the kitchen table. Bank notices, photocopied documents, and printouts from Renata's email inbox. The realization came slowly, painfully. This wasn't simple theft. It was preparation. "Eleanor," Renata whispered, staring at the papers. "They're not trying to help me. They're building a case against me." Her neighbor nodded grimly. "For control. Financial control." Maybe even your property. The room felt colder now. Rain drummed harder against the windows. Renata stared at the walls, at the framed photographs that suddenly looked like assets rather than memories. They don't want me, she said, voice breaking. They want my house. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand steady on Renata's. Then you need to protect yourself, before they take everything. Renata looked down at her open notebook, the ink smudged where tears had fallen. She took the pen again, writing one new line beneath her list of evidence. Find proof. Don't let them erase me. Outside, the rain stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt like a warning, and a beginning. Tomorrow, she would visit a lawyer. The next morning began with the sound of metal sliding against metal, the mailbox creaking open, then slamming shut. Renata wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked slowly toward the door, her steps heavy with unease. Inside the box lay a large brown envelope, stamped with a government seal. She turned it over, heart thudding. Her name appeared neatly typed in the corner. To Mrs. Renata Richter. Concerning guardianship proceedings. Her fingers went cold. She tore it open with shaking hands. The words blurred as she read them. Petition for guardianship, due to cognitive decline, medical evaluations attached, scheduled hearing, 2 weeks from receipt. At the bottom were the signatures of her son, Max, and his wife, Lena. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. For a long time, she stood motionless in the doorway, the paper trembling in her grasp. Then she stumbled to the kitchen, spreading the documents across the table like a deck of poisoned cards. Her eyes found the accusation in every line. Mentally unfit, incapable, unsafe. Tears stung her eyes, but anger rose faster. Declining mental health, she whispered. Is that what I am to them now? An illness to be managed? The room felt smaller, closing in with invisible walls. She could almost hear Lena's voice, calm and rehearsed, convincing others that it was for her own good. And Max, her Max, standing beside her, silent, allowing it. By noon, she had pulled herself together enough to act. She grabbed her coat and the folder of evidence she'd been collecting, the forged papers, Eleanor's photocopy, the list of every strange event. The nearest law office was 3 blocks away. The brass plaque on the door read, Weber and Associates, Family Law. Inside, the receptionist looked up with polite disinterest. Do you have an appointment? No, Renata said, clutching her folder tighter. But I've been accused of being insane, and I need someone to prove I'm not. Moments later, she was ushered into a small office that smelled faintly of coffee and dust. Behind the desk sat Mr. Weber, late 40s, composed, the kind of man who had seen too many messy family cases. Please, Mrs. Richter, he said kindly. Tell me what's happened. Renata spoke for nearly 20 minutes without stopping, about the marriage, the forged documents, the missing mail, the power of attorney. Mr. Weber listened quietly, though she could see the hint of doubt in his eyes, the professional skepticism reserved for the elderly who claim conspiracies. When she finished, she pushed the forged medical certificate toward him. They say I'm unfit, she said, voice low. But that's not my signature. Mr. Weber studied the document, brows knitting. He compared the signature to the one she had just written on his client form. Then he leaned back in his chair, expression changing from polite patience to concern. This is a very close forgery, he murmured. Too close. Whoever did this had access to your records. Renata nodded grimly. Her name is Lena. He looked up sharply. Your daughter-in-law? Yes. And she's trying to erase me. Mr. Weber tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. All right. First, we'll file a countermotion to delay the hearing. Then we'll request an independent psychological evaluation to disprove their claim. I'll also need the original documents from your bank, anything you can provide that shows fraud. Renata exhaled slowly. The room suddenly felt breathable again. So you believe me, she said. Mr. Weber gave a small, careful nod. I believe there's something very wrong here. Outside, the wind rattled the office window, carrying faint traces of winter. Renata looked out at the street, the world she had once trusted now full of shadows. They think I'll give up, she said quietly. That I'll be too scared or too tired to fight. Mr. Weber folded his hands. Will you? Renata turned back to him, her face steady, eyes fierce for the first time in months. No, she said. If they want war, they'll get one. When she left the office, the sky had darkened, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. She walked home without an umbrella, the papers clutched to her chest like a shield. Each step echoed her new purpose. She was no longer just a mother betrayed. She was a woman preparing for battle. The rain hadn't stopped since the day of her meeting with Mr. Weber. It fell in slow, endless sheets, tracing crooked veins down her window, blurring the world outside into silver mist. Renata sat at her dining table, papers spread before her like a battlefield, bank forms, legal notices, printouts of her emails. She was trying to build her defense, to prove what had been done to her. Yet every time she arranged the papers into neat piles, something went missing. First it was a letter from the bank. Then 2 pages from her notebook, the one where she'd written the words "find proof." Don't let them erase me. She searched everywhere. Drawers, folders, the trash. Nothing. At first, she thought it was exhaustion. The case had consumed her. She was sleeping less, eating little. Sometimes she caught her reflection and barely recognized the pale, anxious face staring back. But then the lights began to flicker. It started one night after she'd finished writing down the day's notes. A faint clicking sound from the hallway, followed by a blink of darkness, then another. The hum of the refrigerator dipped, stuttered, returned. She went to the fuse box, everything normal. Still, the feeling of being watched grew, slow and suffocating. 2 days later, she woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. Not the settling creaks of an old house. Actual, deliberate steps. Slow. Careful. On the floorboards just outside her bedroom door. She held her breath. The steps stopped. Then came silence. When she finally found the courage to open the door, no one was there. The front door was locked. The windows shut. But a faint smell of perfume, sharp and floral, lingered in the air. Lena's perfume. The next morning, Renata called the police. They sent a young officer who smiled too politely and took notes too quickly. There's no sign of forced entry, ma'am, he said. Maybe it's just stress. You've been under a lot lately. Stress. The word echoed like an insult. By evening, she felt trapped inside her own mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was losing it. Then, while dusting the living room, her hand brushed against one of the picture frames on the wall. A photo of Max as a boy, smiling with missing teeth. The frame felt oddly heavy. She turned it over and froze. Inside the wooden edge, half hidden by the backing, was a small blacked, a camera lens. Her knees nearly gave out. One by one, she began checking the other frames. 2 more. One behind the clock. Another near the bookshelf. Her heart pounded as realization struck. She hadn't imagined it. Someone had been here. Watching. Listening. Recording. A knock at the door made her flinch so hard she nearly dropped the frame. It was Mr. Davis, her neighbor. Quiet, soft-spoken, the man who always watered his plants at sunrise. Mrs. Richter, he said, frowning. I thought I should tell you, a woman's been parking in front of your house at night. I saw her last evening. She looked familiar. Renata didn't need to ask who. She already knew. She thanked him with a trembling smile and shut the door, locking it twice. Back inside, she stared at the hidden cameras laid out on the table like evidence in a crime she hadn't agreed to be part of. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. And somewhere in the quiet between thunderclaps, she whispered, "They're already inside." The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Sterile, timeless, and merciless. Renata stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, her palms cold despite the heavy coat she wore. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, humming in a rhythm that seemed to sync with her racing heart. Mr. Weber walked beside her, his briefcase tight in his grip. "Remember," he said softly, "stay calm, answer only what's asked, and let me handle the rest." Renata nodded, though her throat felt too tight to reply. Through the glass doors, she caught a glimpse of Lena, poised, elegant, her blonde hair coiled into a perfect bun. She was whispering something to Max, who sat beside her, head bowed, avoiding his mother's gaze. That avoidance hurt more than any lie ever could. When they entered the courtroom, the air felt heavy. Judge Miller, a woman with sharp eyes and a neutral expression, sat behind the bench. Her voice was measured when she spoke. "Let's begin the guardianship hearing for Mrs. Renata Richter." The opposing lawyer, Mr. Fisher, rose first. His words flowed smoothly, rehearsed to perfection. "Your Honor, we present compelling evidence that Mrs. Richter's mental state has deteriorated significantly over the past year. Our clients, Max and Lena Richter, seek guardianship solely to ensure her safety and financial stability." Renata's stomach twisted. The words safety and stability sounded like traps disguised as concern. Then the videos began. On the large screen, grainy clips appeared. Footage from her own house, clearly recorded from the hidden cameras she'd found. In one, she was pacing the kitchen, muttering to herself. In another, she slammed a drawer shut and whispered, "They're watching me." The courtroom murmured. "She seems paranoid," Mr. Fisher commented smoothly. These recordings, taken over several months, demonstrate cognitive decline and delusional thinking. Renata's hands shook. She rose halfway from her seat. "Those cameras were illegal. They were planted in my house." "Mrs. Richter," the judge warned gently, "you'll have your turn." Her legs gave out, and she sank back down. Max still wouldn't look at her. Then came the psychiatrist's report, signed by Dr. Moore, a name Renata had never heard until now. The paper declared her mentally unfit for independent financial management. When it was finally her turn, Mr. Weber guided her to the witness stand. Her heart hammered as she swore to tell the truth. "Mrs. Richter," Mr. Fisher began, "is it true that you've accused your own family of stealing from you?" "Yes," Renata said firmly. "And do you have proof?" Her voice wavered. "I had papers, but some were taken. So no proof." She looked toward Max then, searching for even a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wouldn't meet her gaze. Emotion surged in her chest, sharp and unstoppable. "They forged my signature. They broke into my home. They put cameras in my walls and called it love." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Mr. Fisher smirked slightly. "Paranoia is a symptom, Your Honor." Before she could respond, the door at the back opened. Eleanor Brooks stepped in, clutching a folder. Mr. Weber had called her as a surprise witness. When she took the stand, her voice was steady. "I live next door to Mrs. Richter. I saw Lena leaving her house one morning while Mrs. Richter was away at the doctor's. She had folders in her arms. I assumed she'd been asked to help. But when I found one of Mrs. Richter's ID copies on the ground later, I realized it wasn't help. It was theft." Lena's composure faltered. Her jaw tightened, the faintest crack in her practiced calm. Mr. Weber rose. "Your Honor, may I submit new evidence?" He approached the bench and handed Judge Miller a document. "This is the official statement from the real Dr. Moore, who confirms that this certificate was never issued by his office. The signature is falsified, and the license number belongs to another practitioner who died in 2016. The judge examined the papers, her brow furrowing. A long, heavy silence followed. Mr. Weber's voice cut through it. This wasn't concern for Mrs. Richter's health. This was premeditated fraud, an attempt to seize her estate. Lena's breathing quickened. She turned toward Max, whispering sharply, but the microphones picked up enough to hear. "Say something. Fix this." Max said nothing. Judge Miller looked from the forged documents to the trembling woman in the witness stand. "Mrs. Richter," she said quietly, "I believe we've heard enough for today." Renata exhaled, tears spilling before she could stop them. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. As the gavel struck, Lena's mask cracked completely, her polite smile gone, her face twisted in fury and disbelief. Renata didn't look away. She met Lena's eyes and, for the first time, felt something stronger than fear. Justice wasn't done yet, but the tide had shifted. The verdict came on a Wednesday morning, carried not by a gavel's echo but by the rustle of papers and the stunned silence that followed. Lena was found guilty of fraud, identity theft, and falsifying medical documents. The judge's voice was calm as she read the sentence. 2 years, suspended with probation, pending restitution. Renata didn't watch Lena's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. She didn't need to. She already knew that expression, the brittle disbelief of someone who thought she could bend truth forever. Max sat a few feet away, pale and trembling. He wasn't charged, but his world had already collapsed. His employer had suspended him, his friends had withdrawn, and his wife, his supposed partner in ambition, had left him publicly humiliated. When the hearing ended, he approached Renata in the hallway. His eyes were red, his tie askew. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to come running to her after nightmares. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't know what she was doing. You have to believe me." Renata studied him for a long time. The instinct to reach out, to forgive, still stirred faintly inside her, like an old habit that refused to die. But then she remembered the papers, the cameras, the late-night footsteps, all the moments he'd chosen silence over truth. "No, Max," she said finally. "You didn't want to know." His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. He lowered his eyes, nodded once, and walked away. The echo of his footsteps trailed down the marble corridor. Slow, final, gone. Renata stood alone for a long time after that, the courthouse emptying around her. Justice, she realized, had no sound. It didn't roar or triumph. It whispered, quiet and cold, leaving space for the grief it could never repair. That evening, she visited the cemetery. The path was lined with bare trees, their branches etched against a pale winter sky. Her husband's headstone was simple, weathered with time. She brushed away the fallen leaves and sat beside it, the damp earth soft beneath her fingers. "I did what I had to," she murmured. "They almost took everything, the house, the savings, even my name. But I fought, Carl. I fought harder than I thought I could." The wind moved gently through the grass. She imagined him there, listening as he always had, patient, quiet, never judging. Her voice trembled. "I thought protecting Max was love. But maybe it was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of outliving my usefulness. I gave and gave until there was nothing left to give, and still I thought it was love." She closed her eyes. The sound of the distant city faded, replaced by the rhythm of her heartbeat, steady, fragile, alive. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, though not at peace. Justice had restored her freedom, but not her faith. Some wounds, she understood now, don't heal, they simply stop bleeding. As she walked back toward the gate, the last of the sunlight caught the edge of the gravestone, turning the engraved letters gold for a moment. It looked like a quiet blessing, or perhaps a reminder. By the time she reached the street, Renata had made a decision. Tomorrow she would sell the house, the one they'd fought over, the one filled with memories that had turned into ghosts. It was time to start again. Alone, but unbroken. 3 months passed before Renata finally packed the last box. The house echoed with the hollow sound of her footsteps. No furniture left, no photographs on the walls. Every room held an imprint of what had been. The laughter of birthdays, the arguments that came later, the quiet years of waiting by the phone. The "for sale" sign outside leaned slightly in the wind. A week earlier, she had signed the final papers and handed the keys to a young couple expecting their first child. They reminded her of Max and Lena once, before greed had twisted everything. But instead of bitterness, she felt something gentler now. A strange peace that came not from forgiveness, but from acceptance. She had already decided what to do with the money. A portion would go to an organization that fought elder financial abuse. People like her, who had trusted too easily and paid too dearly. The rest she deposited into a single account under her own name. No shared transfers, no permissions, no hidden signatures. Her name. Her control. The day before leaving, she stood in the backyard one last time. The air smelled faintly of lilac, the same scent that had filled her wedding bouquet decades ago. Her husband's old chair still sat beneath the oak tree. She ran her fingers along its worn arms, remembering the evenings when he'd read aloud from the newspaper, or hummed half-forgotten songs until dusk. "Goodbye, Carl," she whispered. "I think you'd like who I've become." When she locked the door for the final time, she didn't cry. At the train station, her suitcase felt lighter than expected. Inside were only essentials: 2 dresses, a few photographs, and a notebook filled with a story she'd lived, every betrayal, every proof, every small victory. She had promised herself she would never burn it, no matter how tempting the idea of forgetting. Some stories, she believed, needed to stay written, not for others, but for the writer to remember how far she had come. The train hummed to life. As it pulled away from the city, she watched the skyline shrink until it was only a line of distant lights, the past receding, quiet and powerless. Hours later, the smell of salt filled the air. The seaside town appeared like a watercolor painting. Faded rooftops, gulls tracing circles in the pink dawn, waves rolling against the shore in rhythmic patience. Renata stepped onto the platform, breathing in deeply. The ocean stretched before her, endless and alive. She walked until she reached the promenade, where the horizon burned gold with the first rays of sunrise. She sat on a bench, unwrapped the small paper bag the vendor had handed her, a fresh croissant, still warm, and smiled at its simplicity. For the first time in years, no one needed anything from her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Max. "I'm sorry, Mom. I hope you're okay." Renata looked at it for a long moment, then pressed the side button and turned the phone off. She set it beside her on the bench, facing the sea. The waves shimmered brighter now, the sun climbing higher. She felt the warmth on her skin, steady and real. "I invited only special people," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Myself." A soft laugh escaped her, the kind that comes when pain finally runs out of places to live. As the tide reached the shore, she rose, shoes in hand, and stepped barefoot into the water. The cold bit at her ankles, then softened. For the first time in a long time, Renata Richter wasn't waiting for anyone's call.